Audio's going on, folks.
They were doing
Yeah.
it north. They were doing it. Yeah, so I don't know what's happening.
Not a problem until your neighbor's kid dies.
Right.
We're knocking on the door and find out. that-
All right.
That's terrible.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Michelle Guns. This is the Legislative Committee. And we are going to call this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, November 16th at 10:02 a.m. A roll call, please.
Allen. Bates,
Bates here.
Brown,
Brown here.
Silva. Wallace. Gums,
Comes here.
Strathman.
Strathman here.
We have quorum.
Quorum. All right.
Shepro present. Ex
Thank you.
officio.
Thank you, Mr.
Pirog is present.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Noted.
All right. Can I have a motion to approve minutes from October 19th, 2022?
Bates moves.
Bates moves.
Shepro seconds.
Shepro seconds. On a roll call?
Allen. Bates,
Yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Silva. Wallace. Gums,
Gums, yes.
Strathman.
Strathman, yes.
Pirog.
We don't
Shepro.
vote.
I apologize.
It's complicated.
Yeah. Mr. Tepe, are you online? I see Wallace just logged in. New business, we've got a couple of things. Well, you know what, now is the cue. I had to find out where Mr. Tepe is for his next thing. So, Ms. Bates wanted to discuss some new movement toward a possible resolution to support some. Go ahead, Ms. Bates.
Okay, so I would like the county to have a resolution stating our support of the bill that is going, an Illinois state bill that is about common sense gun regulation. And since I wasn't prepared to have that question asked me right this minute, but I will look for the number for the bill.
Well, we
But
could just have
that's what I would
discussion
like to
about,
do.
you know, when there is a bill, we can have just discussion about it at this committee and see what everybody thinks. I think.
Right. I think I may have sent you the number a few weeks ago.
Well, foregoing the number,
Okay.
I think it's.
Um,
pretty
I-
standard.
Because it seems like a good idea that we need more common sense more common sense around gun safety, more common sense gun safety, that I'd like to see the Kane County Board supporting that to the state level, to our legislators. And I thought, why not have a resolution supporting that bill?
Any other comments on that? Does anybody have any opinions on that?
I'd like to be able to, I think we all have the courtesy of being able to see what the legislation is about and have a conversation about it. Since we have an ordinance that we're working through right now. It may be complementary, but I think we need to see what it is, actually the language of it. I've heard a little bit about it yesterday. And I think all those discussions are very important to have.
Very good. So I think we're leaning in that direction, but we really should look at that language first, find the bill number and review it and then bring it back for
Mhm.
a resolution on that. But thanks
Okay.
for bringing it forward.
So can we have that on the agenda, I guess, at our next legislative?
Send me an email so I don't forget.
Okay.
Also, now moving forward, it looks like Mr. Well,
Tepe.
there you are. I see your name now. How could I miss it? Good morning, Mr. Tepe. Under new business, Mr. Tepe has some thoughts and has been working diligently on some legislative issue related to the Social Security increase and the senior tax exemption. There is a conflict. But Mr. Tepe, take it away.
Oh, well, thank you. My apologies for being a little bit late. Hurt my knees, so I'm having trouble getting around.
Oh, no.
But one of the things that has come to my attention is that we've had some recent increases in Social Security, which over the past 2 years total up to be about 15% increase in Social Security. And there are a decent number of people in the county that are on the senior tax freeze. And the senior tax freeze in many instances allows people to comfortably stay in their houses and do so by taking advantage of the way the law reads, so that they're paying somewhat, they're still paying taxes, but they're paying significantly less than they would pay, particularly when they're on a limited income. So at present, the current household income for someone to apply for the senior tax freeze and continue to get it is $65,000. And that has not been increased for several years. So I have been promoting, and I will be doing it more actively now that the elections are over, promoting that we should have the state increase that amount to at least 70,000 and perhaps $75,000.
Very good. So yeah, I did note, I like to read bills, Mr. Tepe. So I did want to note, and I just read it last night, so I apologize for not sharing it with you sooner. There was a fix. There was a House bill, I do not remember it, to fix just that. And it stalled in rules in 2021, March of 2021. So I think actively what you're doing, reaching out to legislators and collectively all of us, I mean, this is going to help all of those seniors that are at that threshold. Certainly think it's a great idea coming from King County, letting our residents, our senior residents know that we're looking out for their financial best interests. And I applaud you for bringing it to this committee so we can get that done. Yes, Madam Chair.
Comments, Shepro?
If I may, Mr. Shepherd, I'll be really quick. No one denies the need for seniors to not have a burden with their property tax. However, there's always that flip coin that if that is frozen and the amount is raised to 70 or 75,000 annual income, then that money that is not being collected because it's frozen at the year that you apply for it and remains frozen at that year, pending every yearly application showing proof of income. So, if you freeze it in 22, and it's frozen then for 5 years, property taxes will increase for schools, et cetera. So it gets dispersed to those people who are not frozen because the money amount, remember, is the same, that it needs to be collected. So everybody else has to pick up that slack. So my question is that what is that burden then to other taxpayers? Because their amount that they would have to pay will increase as we're giving this wonderful opportunity to our seniors. So the taxes are not going down.
Correct.
For a subset is, but everybody else has to pick it up. So the burden becomes increased for, we always like to use the example of the single working mom who may own a home. She will have to pay more in her property tax levy to make sure that her neighbor who's
It's kind
on
of like
fixed
everybody
income-
paying for my social security.
That's right. That's right, Mr. Shepro. You're welcome.
I hear you. I understand that. I guess I would argue that folks are already doing that now, with the current threshold that it is. So,
Will increase potentially the pool. So I'm just showing another side of the coin for this
Understood, yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
That's all. I'm not,
no, I hear you. Yeah, and I am, Mr. Tepe and I will have a lengthy conversation about that. I'm not sure if that was brought up in committee in the state level or not, so I'll dig into that as well. I don't know, Mr. Tepe, did you have anything else?
No, but you know,
Response to that.
Madam Chair brings up a point, but you know, the burden that relates to other property owners is not that great. It's already there. And, you know, if more people were eligible, it might increase a small amount, but we're really talking pennies here. We're not talking dollars.
Very good. And,
Question,
Mr. Shepro was on stack, so Mr. Shepro, go ahead.
Vern, have you, do you know how much is currently, what amount of the tax burden is currently in the senior freeze? That would be an interesting fact to know.
No, but I intend to find out.
I'm sure Mr. Armstrong will have that immediately available. It occurs to me in light, if you've been following some of the stuff at the federal level, a lot of limits are being raised because of inflation. I see that they are going to be increasing the amount that can be put into tax deferred compensation plans. To Madam Chair's point, I wonder if if we are looking to help seniors, what would help the most? Maybe the real estate tax freeze would help the most, but it might be that there are other things that could be done that would help more and not necessarily involve a redistribution to, the example of the single working moms whose burden may go up. I mean, I think there should be a comprehensive look at all of this and not necessarily fasten on one particular item that might not be the best overall.
Understood. And I know Mr. Tepe's going to dig deeper into this. I mean, it was just something that hadn't been on anybody's radar. As far as it wasn't on my radar. So I applaud him for bringing that forward, because what we're looking at is a group of seniors that literally might be dollars over that threshold, $10, $15 over that threshold. And now they're losing $3,000 to $4,000 in tax exemption. So it certainly has to be dug into. And I know Mr. Tepe's doing that. I know our state legislators, their staff is looking into that as well. So we'll have more answers for you coming here soon, but I just wanted to bring it forth and thank Mr. Tepe for asking for it to be brought forth, and we'll dig into it and we'll have further reports on this, but something.
Quick response.
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Shepard.
I think Vern has previously pointed this out. The real problem is that this is exactly the kind of item that ought to be indexed like many other similar programs, and it's not. And that's why we're facing this problem now. Social Security goes up, a lot of other things go up with inflation, including tax levies and so forth. It seems as if this was simply overlooked, and any legislation, I think, should especially address that issue and not require an adjustment every time there's a bump in prices or taxes.
I couldn't agree more with
Madam Chair, if I can make
oh.
a comment.
that. Miss, really quick, Miss Bates was on stack, so you're next. Go ahead, Miss Bates.
Who
Thank
was
you.
that?
Mr. Wallace,
Oh,
but
okay.
go ahead, Mr. Bates.
I don't believe this will result in a redistribution. No, because let's say, so I'm just going to use a little math here. If we have 500,000 people in Kane County approximately, let's guess we have about 150,000 households. It's probably more like 770,000. let's guess that there's 50,000 senior households. If 50,000 seniors cross the threshold, but 50,000 seniors are decreased with this rise of 70,000 to 75,000 in the exemption, the taxes that the seniors are paying will not change. The seniors will remain paying the same amount. The ones that go over will go back under, and they will pay the same amount of taxes based on this idea. Do
the
math.
first year.
Do
Oh,
the math.
For the first year,
In the first year only.
I think so that we can get accurate information. I would not say that if I don't have the number, but it is correct. Why don't we wait and defer this conversation so that Mr. Armstrong can come in and show you his calculations?
Good.
And it's stunning. I'm not saying that it's something that we should not closely consider, Mr. Tepe. I
Yes.
worked very, very well with Age Guide. I was on their board for a number of years, so I'm very sensitive to the needs of seniors, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But this is something that we have to make sure that we have a thorough understanding of what the impact is going to be.
I'll let Ms. Bates respond and then Mr. Wallace.
Okay. I don't think this is going to hurt the single mom because the seniors will remain paying the same amount that they've been paying all along. They just won't be bumped up. Think
A
about
fair
it.
discussion can be had. I mean, and we'll dig into this.
All right,
So,
thank
but
you.
let Mr. Wallace go ahead with your comment. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I mean, I don't agree, Ms. Bates. I think that that's exactly who it's going to hurt. I mean, I think that if the county really wanted to take a leadership role here, then they could calculate what the decrease in ongoing tax revenue increases would be and decrease that amount from their budget, rather than, you know, trying to figure out new ways to distribute, you know, to distribute the tax burden. How about decrease the tax burden by decreasing our budget?
Quick thought.
Mr. Kenyon,
Chair.
go right ahead.
All we have to do is, Mike Kenyon, walk across the street and we have an expert, Mr. Armstrong, and he could explain this in language everybody, well, maybe most people can understand. But, and that would be, other than wasting a lot of time, ask that man to come and explain it to you.
Check. Across the street, next meeting.
Right over there.
Yeah.
Pepro, comment?
We'll have him at our next meeting. Very good. Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Kenyon.
thank you.
Mr. Shepro, go ahead.
One word that probably is best not used is redistribution. It kind of conjures up a lot of thoughts. But the fact is that the tax system, pardon, my phone's ringing and I'm not going to answer it. The tax system, everything in the tax system involves some redistribution. Every deduction that somebody gets that lowers their taxes probably means that money is being redistributed to somebody else. So, you know, I think you've got to be careful using that. You know, this is not a share the wealth plan.
Thank you for that. I think this is a very good conversation. Again, we need to dig into it. We'll have that expert from across the alleyway there come in and discuss this. I truly appreciate Madam Bates, your comments, Madam Chair, your comments as well, things that weren't on my radar. And I know Mr. Tepe is going to dig into this deeply. So we'll get back with better and more informed information along with our expert at the great suggestion, Mr. Kenyon.
He's the best in the state.
Yeah, I'm gonna record this snippet and let him know you said that. All right, any more questions or comments about that issue? All right, moving forward,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you, Mr. Tepe. Moving forward under old business, we have a presentation about draft packaging and paper products. Who's handling that one?
There, Ryan.
Oh, there we go.
It's Ryan.
Hi there. Good morning.
Good morning. Let me just get myself situated. That seems good. Okay. Thank you for having me. All right. So I'm here to talk to you about a draft piece of legislation. It has not been introduced yet. The current status is it's being workshopped among stakeholders. However, there is a plan by the core group that developed it to introduce it early during the next legislative session. It's a fairly complicated piece of work, and it has quite profound impacts for recycling in the state, so I think it's good to be talking about it early. It was developed by a core group of stakeholders with interest in recycling, including my peers in many northeastern Illinois counties. Cook, DuPage, and Lake County were all involved. However, just for full disclosure, Kane County was not involved in developing this, mostly because it was bad timing with the staffing transition between Jennifer and myself. Okay, so the bill I'm about to talk about is what we call an extended producer responsibility bill, and I thought it would be worthwhile just explaining that concept. So extended producer responsibility means that product manufacturers start bearing some or all of the costs for the end of life disposal of their products. This was a concept developed in Europe about 30 odd years ago, so not exactly a new idea, but it's having kind of a moment right now in terms of actually being enacted. So the goal is to integrate some of the externalities, so costs that exist because these products exist, but these costs are not borne by the producers, they're borne either by the consumer or by all of society, and bring them into the loop of corporate budgeting and decision making. This is sometimes talked about in a circular economy model. That's another kind of buzzword of the moment. Trying to keep materials and thinking circular and not have these kind of offshoots borne by other people. So when you don't have extended producer responsibility, the costs of disposing of items are generally borne by consumers. So when someone is paying to throw their trash out, and that's a burden. There is sometimes borne by state and municipal governments and taxpayers with specialty collection programs. So I think a classic example of that would be household hazardous wastes. Consumers are buying these products that are quite dangerous, and if you just throw them in the landfill, it's going to cause serious pollution and possibly health problems. So the state and local governments pay to have specialty collection for this, and it is expensive. Meanwhile, the companies that produce these products aren't really bearing that burden at all. Waste haulers and recycling facility operators bear the cost when products are disposed of improperly. Classic example right now is lithium-ion batteries. People throw those in their recycling carts. They get compacted in recycling trucks, explode, and often destroy those trucks. And cause risks to the driver, obviously, of having their truck be on fire. And then all of society can also bear these costs when you've got pollution problems coming out the landfill spaces being taken up by things that could possibly be recycled, etc. Okay. So there are some hallmarks of good extended producer responsibility legislation. I did not come up with these. They're pretty much verbatim paraphrased from a group called the Product Stewardship Institute. This is what they do, is help kind of develop frameworks for this type of legislation. So obviously, an important component is producer responsibility. Whoever is designing and producing, manufacturing the item needs to fund some end of life disposal for that product. And the legislative part is that is made a condition of sale usually. So it's you can't sell your product unless you're buying in to the extended producer responsibility component. And then all products in the class should be covered. It's important to have a level playing field and equity among producers, with all participating at some level. Obviously, you're not going to treat mega billion corporations and little, family-owned businesses the same, but they should be both be involved at some level. These programs need to be results-based, generally following the reduce, reuse, recycle hierarchy. Producers, usually the way these are written, producers have a lot of flexibility in how they design the programs. But there should be in the laws some type of milestone or target, so that the government usually can be aware if the program is working and require changes if it's not, or if it's falling far short. And because we're usually talking about consumer products, consumer education is a key component as well. The people buying the items have to be made aware of what to do to recycle them or reuse, reduce, etc. And then we want law in general to be transparent and accountable. There should be good stakeholder engagement during development. It's kind of what we're doing right now. Public meetings, publicly accessible documents once programs are implemented, etc. And then there's generally going to be a role for entities that aren't covered by the bill, including government, obviously, but also retailers and consumers. Often you find the government in an oversight role, approving program plans, setting those targets, enforcing participation to keep that level playing field. Retailers are going to be responsible for for just knowing the law exists and stocking producers, products that comply with the law, and also a little bit on the customer education side. But then consumers are ultimately responsible for, the end of life disposal of things that they own. So let's talk a little bit about packaging and the problems with it. So single-use packaging makes up about 40% of waste collected in Illinois. That's 7 million tons annually. It's a lot. Packaging is becoming pervasive in the environment as litter, and then you hear a lot now about microplastics. So a microplastic has a very specific definition. I think it's a piece of plastic less than 5 millimeters in dimension. But every large piece of plastic, unfortunately, is essentially destined to become a microplastic just in the environment. And we're hearing more and more about how this plastic gets integrated into the food chain, into fish, and eventually into us if we eat those animals. The labeling on packaging products about recyclability is inconsistent and is really confusing. There's one of those, chasing loop symbols on literally anything you put your hands on, but not all of it is recyclable. And how is the public supposed to navigate and understand that? So there's frustration out there among the general public about labeling, about the negative media coverage that recycling is broken, it's a scam, it doesn't work. Changes in international markets, and just generally a limited ability to avoid unrecyclable packaging. Like, I can't buy raspberries that don't come in one of those clamshells, even if I want to. So it's led to a lot of public fatigue and just skepticism about recycling in general. There isn't enough incentive in just the free market to spur improvement from producers. To be honest, single-use items are cheap. They've probably never been cheaper. So there's, and I mean, the public cares, but they don't necessarily care enough to demand use of post-consumer recycled packaging and recyclable items. And then the cost of recycling collection is ever increasing. I mean, no more so than this year when the cost of fuel and labor have spiked so much. And of course, that's being passed on to everyday people. So what materials then are covered in this draft bill? Well, it covers basically anything that could be construed as packaging material. If you're looking at online sales, that would be both the outside box, so your shipping package or your cushiony envelope, but also the packaging inside, actually holding the product. It includes any containers, bottles, cans, jugs, tubs, holders, hangers, tags, and takeout food packaging. There's also a class of material in the bill called packaging-like material, which is defined as items that are provided or sold to consumers intended for a single use that facilitate either consumption or transport of the product. So that's when your plastic bag comes in, you know, you don't absolutely need it. It's not integral to the product, but it's going to help you carry it out the store. And the rest tend to, you know, apply to food and restaurants. So straws, plastic utensils, cups, plates, etc. It also covers all printed and printable paper products given and sold to consumers, with the exception of bound books. So textbooks, novels, etc. are not covered. And then sanitary paper, you know, your TP, tissues, paper towels, not covered. However, you know, examples of things that are covered would be, you know, flyers, brochures, booklets, catalogs, greeting cards, directories, newspapers, magazines, etc. Okay. So that's a lot. Is there anything that is not covered? So to be completely exempt, a packaging or a paper product that would otherwise be covered must be first reusable, but also returnable. And that's that returnable part is a big kind of difference in what we typically think of for reusability. So the item can't contain toxic substances like phthalates, biphenyls, PFAS, because that's going to inhibit its safe reuse and preparation for being given to another consumer. Most of these, and certainly all the examples I have up on our slide, are food products. So the packaging item has to be able to be safely washed and sanitized according to federal and state food safety laws. It has to be able to be recycled at the end of its life, other than ceramic products. And then finally, there has to be this return program so that users can actually take back their empty bottle or container, and then the company will sanitize and refill it, not the consumer. And the return rate in practice has to be at least 80%. So that's kind of a lot. There are a few models of this being done. Great example is microbreweries. My picture up there with a growler. You know, you buy that growler, you take it back, they wash it and refill it, sanitize it. I've heard kombucha is sold in a similar way. Oberweis does that kind of, people view it as old fashioned, but from an environmental perspective, it's actually pretty progressive to be using washable glass milk bottles. And then Starbucks is piloting a reusable cup program. But they started, I think, last year, and it's still, as far as I know, only in their flagship store in Seattle. But they claim they're going to roll it out to more areas too. So we'll see. Okay. So in the draft bill, who's a producer of paper and packaging products? And this gets a little confusing. So product manufacturers who sell packaged items with their brand on it are producers. So if I decide I'm going into business as Claire's Widgets, I, you know, pay people to build my widgets, buy packaging, put them in the packaging, stamp my name on them, and then sell them to a retailer to get out to the public, I'm a producer. If I'm a brand owner who pays someone else to manufacture and package my product, I'm still the producer under the law. However, if I decide to go to become my own retailer and open a widget store, I bring in other manufacturer stuff, but I also have my own store brand widget. I am no longer a producer under the law. Whoever produced the packaging that I'm buying becomes the producer who's responsible for it. So that's sort of interesting. In instances where the item manufacturer, brand owner, or packaging manufacturer are all foreign entities who aren't going to be enforced under a state law, the importer becomes the packaging producer under the law. Internet sales are mostly the same. So those rules I just described are all the same for the inner packaging, but then the manufacturer of the shipping box and the cushioning, et cetera, become the producer for that material. And the publishers of magazines, newspapers, catalogs are the producers, and other paper products that don't have an obvious brand on them. You're going to go through 1 through 4 to figure out who's on the hook for that. So who isn't a producer? The public sector. You know, our recycling program produces a published green guide every year. Are we suddenly going to have to, you know, pay for the recycling of that? Well, no, because we're a government. 501c3 organizations and public benefit corporations also exempt. Retailers, I kind of described that in my last slide, how, you know, if my store is the store brands, I got to pass on the responsibility, but so it's in there twice in the draft language. They're also very obviously exempt. And then producers who fall under a certain de minimis. So it's by weight and by revenue. There's 2 different ways to fall under it. So, you know, whether you're Walmart or whether you're a much smaller, you know, store or producer, it's very interesting who's been in and who's been out in the draft. So if this is enacted as written, what happens? The first thing is that the state IEPA is going to form a producer responsibility advisory council that involves stakeholders from pretty much every area that cares about packaging and recycling. So from manufacturers and retailers to environmental nonprofits and local governments. The producers are going to organize under one or more organization called a producer responsibility organization, which is going to be responsible ultimately for enacting the law and submitting 5-year program plans to IEPA. The advisory council and that producer responsibility organization, which it could be one or it could be more than one. I'm just going to say PRO as in one, just for ease, but so they're going to work together to develop a scope of work for a statewide needs assessment. Like, where are we on being able to recycle packaging and paper products, and where do we need to be, and how are we going to fill those gaps? Once that scope of work is approved, the needs assessment will be done by a third party and paid for, funded by the producers cumulatively. IEPA has to conduct a study on plastic recycling technologies. There's a lot of kind of like startup, fly-by-night plastic recycling. People are trying to come up with new and innovative ways to recycle plastic, and I think that's a good thing, but sometimes there's really not a lot behind the idea and it doesn't go anywhere. So what can we consider recycling under this law, and what is just basically burning stuff? IEPA will generate a list of problematic ingredients that might be in packaging or paper products that hinder recycling or pose other types of problems. More outcomes. So before the program is fully implemented, the producer responsibility organization is going to develop a list of statewide recyclable materials that must be collected and recycled by any hauler in order to be included in the program and to have that recycling ultimately paid for by the producer organization. However, there is a little wiggle room to allow alternative collection programs. There are certain materials, including plastic films and styrofoam, that are just not really well suited to curbside recycling because they're very light. They tend to fly out of trucks, fly all over the place, and because they become tangled in equipment. And then there are benchmarks in the law as well, that the recycling rate for covered materials has to be 45% or should be 45% by the end of 2030, and then up to 50% by 2035. The producer responsibility organization must ultimately pay for the collection, sorting, transportation, and processing of all covered materials. So all municipalities with over 1,500 residents have to receive curbside collection. Though, you know, there may be municipalities that are under that population benchmark that already have curbside recycling, and they have to be allowed to keep it. Then smaller municipalities and also townships that don't meet that benchmark and don't have curbside already have to at least receive a recycling drop-off point no further than 15 miles away from the borders. Material specific alternative collection programs, I just mentioned those with styrofoam and plastic bags. They may be developed, but they have to be approved by IEPA. And then there's also a ban. It's pretty unlikely this is going to stay part of the bill, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but a bill of certain toxic substances that are additives from byproducts and ink components, mostly in plastic, but sometimes with those inks in paper products as well.
So they would just ban them completely.
Yeah,
So
ban
just
use of
those
those ingredients. Yeah.
Okay.
And more outcomes. Yes, there's more. Like I said, this is a pretty complicated document. The producer responsibility organization has to develop and fund waste prevention and reuse. So that's one. There's kind of two parts. There's waste prevention and reuse. That's getting to the reduce reuse part before you get to recycling. And then composting infrastructure and education programs. Each of those programs has to receive 5 to 10% of the total program plan implementation costs every year. So what they're paying to recycle, they also have to set aside 5 to 10% for these other programs as well. They're going to be issuing grants to public, tribal, and nonprofit entities, and to private entities too, if the project clearly provides public benefit. Specifically on the education side, the PRO must engage in public education directly, but they're going to also establish a public education fund, which it says right now in the draft is going to be 50 cents per Illinois resident annually. And this is the part that really impacts Kane County, is that the counties can receive 20 or 50% of the amount associated with their residents for recycling outreach and education efforts, as long as they have an education plan in place that's, you know, developed. You know, you're going to work with your municipalities, and it would be approved by the PRO as well. So that's 25%, 25 cents essentially per Kane County resident. It would be $125,000, give or take, for my program. That would be so great. And then the organization has to report their activities annually. Okay. So how is all this being paid for? Essentially what happens is the producer responsibility organizations who are running the program charge volume-based dues to their members. Again, these members being mostly producers of products that are packaged to fund the program. And the dues have to be variable based on sortability and recyclability of materials, reusability and reuse in practice, commodity values of recycled material, compostability, the extent to which products use sustainable and renewable materials, and the extent to which they incorporate post-consumer recycled material. So the highest rates are going to be for things that are not recyclable at all, things that are commonly littered, possibly because they can't be recycled, and items that we call system disruptors. That means that they're really bad for recycling, and can actually impede the recycling of other materials. The draft does call for a flat fee for small producers, because this is all pretty complicated, obviously. So folks making less than a ton of product are exempt. If they're between 1 and 15 tons, they would be in this flat fee realm. Again, less than $1 million is not included in the program. Between a 1 and 5 million in revenue would fall under the flat fee. Then finally, producers that just ignore this, wish it would go away, they can stop selling in Illinois once this is fully implemented, or they're going to face fines of up to $7,000 per day for violation. So this is a very complicated graphic, but just to kind of put some critical points in time, this is all presupposed on the bill passing during the first half of 2023. Obviously, if that does not happen, everything would be bumped back. So the first activities you have are the formation of these groups, the advisory council, the producer responsibility organizations. They're going to work together to develop a scope of work for the needs assessment. Then the first major activity happens a full 2 years after the bill is signed into law. And that's, so EPA finishes its plastic report, and then the needs assessment results are finalized and agreed upon by the PRO and IEPA. A few months after that, the PRO issues its a minimum materials list. Again, these are things that have to be collected curbside or through drop-offs for inclusion in the program. IEPA is going to publish its list of materials that impede recycling. And then by the start of 2026, we have our first 5-year program plan developed by the PRO, approved by IEPA, and program year 1 begins. The formal ban on sales of packaging and paper products that belong to companies that haven't bought into the PRO, it takes effect, is that 3 years? 3 years after the bill is signed into law. By 2030, as I mentioned, we're looking at having a 45% recycling rate of covered materials, and by 2035, under 2035, a 50% rate. Okay. Oh. Could I get the next slide? Oh no, what happened? Okay. So as I mentioned, I was not involved in drafting this, but I did have an opportunity to submit comments. And this is kind of a very summarized version of what I was concerned about. So in our region, residents usually, so the municipality or the township acts as kind of a mediator between haulers and their residents and secures a decent rate for people. But then usually the resident pays the hauler directly for their service. And often it's perceived that there is no cost for recycling, at least I live in North Aurora, under my contracts with Groot service, I can receive a recycling bin for nothing. But all my trash and yard waste would need to have a sticker, and those stickers are pretty pricey in North Aurora. So is there a mechanism to ensure then that either your sticker rates or your cart rental rates go down once the haulers are getting reimbursed by the PRO for recycling? Because it's not that recycling is free or that it pays for itself through the sale of the commodities. It absolutely doesn't. I tell you, absolutely does not, especially right now. People perceive it as free, but it's not free. Those costs are just rolled into what you're paying for trash and yard waste, honestly. So these hauler contracts are going to need to be revised mid-stride, and that's not impossible, but it's going to take a lot of work. And I think municipalities will need some guidance on that. I thought it was important to clarify how restaurants and especially corporate franchises are going to be impacted and covered by the bill. You could kind of see a scenario where a lot of franchises could fall under the de minimis, but they're producing all this waste that's stamped with the corporate logo, not with the logo of mom and pop's McDonald's or whatever. So, how does that work, and how can that be made fair? I thought it was important to clarify whether retailers are ever on the hook as importers, or if it's really a blanket exemption. I think there is a way, I don't know how common it would be, but there's a way that a blanket exemption could have an unintended consequence of making foreign produced packaging more affordable and cost competitive against domestically produced items. And that's not something we want to do. And then with the education and outreach funds, obviously I feel very fortunate that there's this population-based allocation of some of those education funds, but I think it's important too that the part that isn't population-based, the other 25 cents, is really going to need to be focused to communities that haven't had recycling in the past. I mean, there are a lot of questions among Kane County residents about how to recycle right. I answer the phone all day long, every day. But I mean, compared to a county that's never had recycling, it's going to be a whole new world for them, and they're really going to need that support. And then finally, another important part is clarifying, in my eyes, is clarifying whether your recycling rate, those benchmarks, is the proportion of material that is actually collected and sorted, or the proportion of materials that's actually sold to a buyer. There's definitely concerns about haulers sometimes being a little shifty, and if they own a landfill, it might be easier sometimes for them to landfill potentially recyclable material than find a buyer when the markets are bad. Right now, I'm sad to say the market for mixed paper is horrible. And, haulers are having to store bales of sorted mixed paper for weeks to be able to get rid of it for pennies on the ton. So not great, but when the public finds out that things they think are being recycled are being thrown in the landfill, it completely erodes trust in recycling, and it's not good for any of us, I don't think. So yeah, that's what I have. I'm happy to take any questions or any discussion on this.
Yes,
Mr. Kenny, go ahead.
Like Kenny, as I drive to the county, I see TV.
Mike, please.
I've got the, oh, it's not on.
Ah,
You have to turn it on. Anyway, I see TV sets and tires. So when I go buy a tire, I have to pay a recycling fee. What happens to that money? And when I buy a TV set, I know there's another fee. Who gets that money and what do they do with it?
So I'll do the tires first. Yeah. So it isn't hard to get rid of your tires if you're buying a new tire, because like you said, there's the fee you just pay. So that directly goes to fund the transport of the tire from the tire store to an actual tire recycler. I mean, they're heavy, it costs.
Well, I should be able to take my tire back, the used tire, back and say, here's my used tire. I paid for it. You take care of it, but that doesn't happen.
I thought they only charged the fee when they were actually taking the old tires.
When the tire wears out, you've got to get rid of it.
We've got to buy a new tire. So they take your old tire and give you a new tire.
Right.
So you
Right.
shouldn't have old tires lying around.
It doesn't seem to work
Well, you
because I
can
see
paint 'em and
piles of
make 'em a
tires.
Yeah,
flower
but
pot.
people do dump them because there are not good ways to get rid of tires if you're not buying a new tire.
Truck tires,
Yeah. Yeah.
tractor
No.
tires.
tractor tires. Paint it,
Yeah.
make a flower pot.
Yeah, we do. So the county does do work with IEPA to support municipalities and township road districts in getting rid of dump tires. But it's not for members of the public to drop off their tires. But I am interested in that. So that's something I might work on next year, is a tire event for residents. And then your question about TVs. So the TV thing, you don't actually pay a recycling fee on the TV when you buy it. You have to pay the fee when you recycle it. And that's just because of how the state law is written. There's 14 classes of covered items in the law, and the only ones that recyclers are allowed to charge for are TVs and computer monitors. And that money is supposed to fund the collection of those items. So for Kane County, we work with eWorks, a nonprofit organization. And our sites are staffed whenever they're open, so we don't get dumped all the time, which is good. But the money to pay those people to be there day in and day out comes from those recycling fees. And yeah, people don't want to pay it and they dump their TVs. We take those too. I mean, I don't drive along and take them off the side of the road, but we do take dumped TVs from municipalities and township road districts.
I have a quick question. When is this going to be introduced again? In the January session?
Yeah, it should be in the January session.
Okay. And then, I just had a couple of comments. My grandmother lived to 103 years old, and I remember when I was younger, she used to say we've turned into a throwaway society. I can remember taking those pop bottles, putting them in the
Yeah.
container, walking down to the dime store, turning them in, buying candy, and then walking home. And, you showed a milk bottle and how old fashioned that is. There's nothing wrong with that old fashionedness, in my personal opinion. I would love to see all glass bottles. That's just me. I mean, I'd be glad to take yours and go get some more candy. But,
They say a beer bottle.
I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there that, we have created a storm of just throw away everything and replace. And so I just came to my brain. Anyways, any more comments or questions on this?
No,
Action
but thank
that We
you.
need to take.
Silva,
Yes, Dr. Silva, go ahead.
good morning. As I was listening to the presentation, there were a couple of things that struck out at me regarding our goals. I read an article in a medical journal, and I would love to pinpoint it. I'll have to go back, about how major companies, and the only one that really that I can remember by name is Coca-Cola, that they're not hitting their major targets. So they're actually raising their standards, but they're also allowing more time to hit their targets, because the targets that they had set for themselves years ago, they're not meeting. The other point that I wanted to make was another word that that really rang true with me was when you mentioned systemic disruptors. And I think what I understood were how some of these non-recyclable items can hinder the recycling process, like styrofoam and, clothes hangers, those sorts of things. I think I'm accurate in that point, and please correct me if I'm not. But what I hear when I hear about systemic disruptors is how they affect us personally in our bodies. So chemicals like phthalates and BPA have been linked to something called obesogens, which basically means that, they're contributing to our pandemic of obesity. They're hormone disruptors. They disrupt fertility. So many things that they're associated with how our body functions. And I think we consume, I don't have an exact number, but we consume a very large amount of plastics. And at any given time, if one of us were tested, we'd find near toxic levels. And so that's one of the conversations that I would love to include in presentations like these, because we definitely care about our environment. But as human beings, they are also disrupting our lives and our health, and they're kind of silent. We don't realize what's going on, but they are linked to cancer. They're carcinogens. There's so many things that these everyday uses, like the caps on the coffees that are plastic, and plastic and heat don't mix well. They melt. The chemicals leak into our drinks and our food. Plastic containers from like take-home containers from restaurants, anything like that. And it's just so prevalent in our society. So I would love to, I love what's going on here. I would love to see more of it, but also included in the conversation is how it really affects us on an everyday basis. Thank you.
Yeah, I did gloss over it a little bit because the core group who developed this bill, they've gotten a lot of pushback on the toxics component of the law. Like, a lot of people are like, it should be passed. Something preventing the use of these toxic additives in consumer products should be passed, but it shouldn't be a part of this law. It should be its own thing. So it sounded to me like they were likely to take that out of the next draft, but we'll have to see. But I agree, it's kind of scary.
It is very scary. And I think I could see why it wouldn't be included, because it does, this is so important in and of its own. reason for doing all of this, but at the end of the day, it's important also to include the health benefits for it. So I think this is something that can be linked to public health, even if it's not done at the state level, that we have the knowledge and that we propagate the knowledge amongst our residents is so very important because there's so much research. But I found the presentation very enlightening. Thank you.
Thanks so
Madam
much.
Chair Strathman here.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Silva. Ms. Strathman, go right ahead.
I just want to thank Claire for this comprehensive presentation this morning. There was a lot of really good information here. I also want to add that with what Dr. Silva was saying, they're also finding these components in fetal tissue. So it's also not only as we
Oh,
are,
brother.
after we're born, these elements are also showing up in fetal tissue. So it's absolutely a problem. And I think what Claire said about it needing to be, that part of it needing to be a separate bill totally makes sense to me. But I think this bill is such a good bill, and it's so forward-looking and protecting not only our environment and our bodies and people, but it's a good way to have the manufacturers share the responsibility for recycling. I want to thank you, Claire, very much for this presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you. One thing I forgot to mention, just really quick, if this does pass in Illinois, we won't be the first, but we will be kind of on the leading edge. Bills like this, or with a similar intent, they haven't been enacted yet, but they've been passed and signed into law in Maine, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Colorado is probably the biggest deal because their recycling rate is really low. There's a lot of rural communities in Colorado that do not have recycling, but theoretically they're going to get it.
Very good. Thank you so much. Ms. Bates, go ahead.
About TVs, which you can't call packaging, right? I don't think
No,
TVs
no,
are
they're
packaging.
not.
Can we have, can that be our next bill? The
Remember your
producers or sellers would have to pay the $25 fee when they sell it?
There's definitely room to revise, Sarah. Yeah, I don't know if that one would fly.
We would have to have a piggy bank to put that money in for
Yeah.
recycling the-
Somebody will just-
someday, something like that.
Yeah.
We'll dream on it. All
Okay.
right, very good. Thank you so much for everything. Ms. Strathman, do you have any comments as co-chair or?
I would just like to thank Claire again. I think that's a excellent presentation for us to be aware of something that's coming up soon that will probably affect us all in more ways than one. So that's all I'd have to say today. And good day to everybody.
Very good. All right, we have no need for executive session.
No, I'm done.
So I think I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Bates moves.
Bates moves.
Strathman second.
Strathman seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you all very much.
Have
Oh,
a good day.
today is National Check Your Wipers Day. It's still snowing out, so check your wipers today. And have a great day.